there comes a quiet kind of exhaustion that nobody notices because it does not look dramatic. You still answer the texts, still check in on people, still remember birthdays, still stay calm during conflict, still listen, still understand, still carry. And somehow, you become the person everyone leans on, the safe one, the emotionally mature one, the one who understands. But somewhere beneath all of that, something inside you begins getting tired. Not physically tired, something deeper. The kind of tiredness that comes from always being emotionally available, while quietly feeling unseen yourself. Because here is the hidden cost nobody talks about. Being the one who always understands can slowly teach you to abandon your own pain. And maybe you know this feeling. Someone hurts you, and before you even process your own feelings, you explain theirs. They're just overwhelmed. They had a hard childhood. They didn't mean it like that. They're struggling too. And maybe all of that is true. Maybe they are struggling. Maybe they are wounded. Maybe they are overwhelmed. But somewhere along the way, you became so good at understanding everyone else that you stopped asking who was understanding you. Because emotional labor has a strange way of disguising itself as love. At first, it feels meaningful. You are the listener, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the emotionally aware one. You notice when someone's voice changes. You sense tension before anyone says anything. You carry emotional atmospheres most people never even notice. And people probably tell you, you're so understanding. You're so patient. You just get people. But what they do not see is how expensive that gift can become. Because when you are always the understanding one, relationships quietly become unequal. Not intentionally, not maliciously, just gradually. You become the person who absorbs, the one who regulates everyone else, the one who keeps conversations calm, the one who apologizes first, the one who gives grace, the one who keeps trying to see the good in people, even when it hurts. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin carrying emotional weight that was never meant to be yours alone. Psychology sometimes calls this emotional labor. But honestly, that phrase almost sounds too small. Because what it often feels like is emotional responsibility. Like somehow, keeping relationships emotionally safe became your job. You notice everyone's feelings. You adapt. You soften. You explain. You manage tension. And after a while, you stop asking for much. Because asking feels uncomfortable, heavy, inconvenient. You tell yourself, I can handle it. It's not a big deal. I don't want to burden anyone. And this is where something painful quietly begins. Because the person who always understands others often becomes the person nobody checks on deeply. Not because people do not care, but because you make carrying things look effortless. You became so strong. People forgot you get tired too. Maybe pause here for a second. Because if this sounds like you, I wonder how often you swallowed disappointment. Because understanding felt easier than speaking up. How often you made excuses for people while quietly hurting. How often you gave people grace you secretly wish someone would give you. Because maybe, just maybe, you became the understanding one for a reason. And usually, that reason begins earlier than people realize. Sometimes, the children who grow into emotionally understanding adults were the children who learned to read rooms early, who sensed tension quickly, who learned how to stay safe by understanding emotions. Maybe someone around you was unpredictable, overwhelmed, emotionally unavailable. Maybe conflict felt unsafe. Maybe peacekeeping became survival. So you adapted. You became emotionally intelligent early, hyper-aware, sensitive, careful. You learned. If I understand people enough, maybe things stay calm. Maybe people stay. Maybe I stay safe. And what starts as survival quietly becomes identity. Now you are the strong friend, the therapist friend, the emotionally mature partner, the calm one, the one people run to when life hurts. And at first, it even feels good to be needed, to be trusted, to feel emotionally valuable. But there is a hidden danger there too, because sometimes being needed starts replacing being loved. And those are not the same thing. Being needed feels important, but love also pours back. Love notices when you are tired. Love asks questions. Love creates safety for your emotions too. And if you are always giving understanding without receiving it, something inside you slowly begins running on empty. Not loudly, quietly, like emotional erosion. A little more exhaustion every year. A little more resentment you do not want to admit. A little more loneliness hiding underneath competence. Because one of the loneliest experiences in the world is being deeply emotionally available while secretly feeling emotionally alone. And the hardest part? Most people around you may never notice because you still show up, still smile, still care, still understand, even when you are running on emotional fumes. Until one day, a question quietly begins rising inside you, one you may have spent years avoiding. Who takes care of the person who is always taking care of everyone else? And maybe the deeper question underneath it is this: at what point did understanding everyone else become more important than understanding myself? And maybe this is where the story becomes more complicated. Because if you are the one who always understands, you probably did not become that way by accident. You learned it. Slowly, quietly, sometimes so early. You do not even remember when it started. Because there is often a hidden belief underneath emotional overgiving. A belief so familiar, it starts feeling like truth. If I understand people enough, maybe they will not leave. If I become easy enough to love, maybe I will finally feel safe. If I can just explain their behavior, maybe the pain will make sense. And suddenly, without realizing it, understanding becomes survival, not connection. Survival. You stop asking, does this relationship feel good? And start asking, how do I make this relationship work? Even if working means carrying most of it yourself. And this is the hidden trap deep feelers often fall into. You become so compassionate that you accidentally start over-functioning emotionally. Psychologists sometimes describe this as self-abandonment through empathy. And honestly, that phrase hurts a little because it sounds so backwards. How can something beautiful like empathy become the very thing exhausting you? But maybe you know exactly what that feels like. Someone disappoints you, and before your sadness fully arrives, your understanding shows up first. They're stressed. They probably didn't mean it. They had a difficult upbringing. I know they cared deep down. Again, sometimes those things are true. But there is a painful question worth asking. How often has your compassion become permission for someone else to stop showing up? Because there is a difference between understanding someone and constantly excusing behavior that hurts you. A huge difference. And deep feelers struggle with this more than most. Because you do not just see actions, you see wounds, patterns, pain. You see the scared child underneath someone's behavior. You see potential. You see who they could become. And sometimes, that gift becomes dangerous because you start loving people for their potential while quietly grieving who they actually are. You tell yourself, they're trying, they're healing, things will get better. And meanwhile, you are becoming lonelier inside the relationship. But because you understand their pain, you convince yourself your own pain can wait. Maybe pause here for a second, because this part matters. If you are always the understanding one, I wonder how often you have silenced yourself to keep peace. How often you swallowed disappointment because confrontation felt selfish. How often you stayed calm externally while internally feeling completely overwhelmed. And maybe nobody noticed because emotionally intelligent people often hide suffering very well. You know how to regulate, how to stay composed, how to explain things gently, how to soften conflict. But here is the painful truth. Being emotionally mature does not mean you should carry relationships alone. And somewhere along the way, you may have confused patience with emotional responsibility. Because patience says, I can hold space for someone. Emotional over-responsibility says, it is my job to fix this. And those are not the same thing. This becomes especially painful in attachment dynamics because many deep feelers, especially anxiously attached or emotionally sensitive people, end up paired with emotionally unavailable partners, avoidant partners, dismissive people, emotionally inconsistent people, and suddenly, you become the translator of the relationship. You explain their silence, their distance, their inconsistency. You tell yourself, they just struggle emotionally. They need time. I know they care in their own way. And again, sometimes all of that is true, but truth without reciprocity still hurts because eventually, being the understanding one becomes exhausting. Not because you stopped loving, but because loving stopped feeling mutual. And here is the part nobody prepares you for. Quiet burnout rarely starts with anger. It starts with heaviness. You feel emotionally full, but emotionally unfed, like you are pouring from a cup that nobody notices is empty. You become tired in strange ways. Texts feel heavier. Conversations drain you. You feel guilty for needing space, while secretly craving it. And maybe for the first time in your life, you stop wanting to explain people, not because you became cold, but because something inside you is whispering, I cannot keep carrying this alone. And that whisper? It matters. Because burnout is often the nervous system asking for honesty. Not punishment, not guilt. Honesty. The kind that says, I am tired. I need more too. I cannot keep surviving relationships that only work because I overfunction emotionally. And maybe that realization feels uncomfortable, especially if being needed became part of your identity. Because who are you? If you are not the helper, the fixer, the emotionally strong one, what happens when you stop carrying everyone? What happens when you finally ask, who is carrying me? And maybe that question changes more than you expect. And maybe this is the part nobody warns you about. The moment when understanding turns into exhaustion. Not suddenly, quietly, so quietly, you almost miss it. Because emotional burnout does not usually arrive like collapse. It arrives like distance. You answer fewer messages. You feel strangely numb after conversations. You start needing silence in ways you never used to. Not because you stopped caring, but because caring started costing too much. And this can feel deeply confusing for someone like you, because you are not used to being the one who pulls back. You are the one who stays, the one who gives one more chance, the one who says, maybe they're just struggling. Maybe I should be more patient. But eventually, something inside you begins asking a different question. Not, what do they need? But, why am I disappearing inside this? And that question can feel terrifying, because for a long time, being emotionally available became part of your identity. You were the safe person, the steady one, the one who could hold hard conversations, the one who stayed calm during emotional storms. But nobody talks enough about what happens when the safe person stops feeling safe themselves. Because emotional labor without reciprocity creates quiet resentment, and resentment is uncomfortable for deep feelers. You probably do not even like admitting that word, Because resentment sounds harsh, unkind, ungenerous. But often, resentment is just grief that never got acknowledged. The grief of feeling unseen. The grief of giving more than you had. The grief of quietly hoping, maybe this time someone will notice me too. And when that noticing never comes, something starts changing inside you. You still love, but you feel tired while loving. You still show up, but part of you feels emotionally absent. You still understand everyone, but secretly, you are craving someone who simply understands you without needing instructions. Maybe pause here for a second, because if this feels familiar, I wonder how long you have been carrying emotional weight that nobody even realized was heavy. How many years you have spent translating people's behavior, softening conflict, making yourself easier to hold, while quietly carrying things alone. And maybe the loneliness of that has been harder than you admit. Because there is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being emotionally needed, but not emotionally known. People admire your strength, depend on your wisdom, come to you when they are hurting. But how often do they ask, how are you really doing? Not surface level, not polite conversation, but deeply, honestly, without needing anything back. And sometimes, the answer hurts. Because maybe you became so good at being emotionally self-sufficient that people stopped seeing your needs altogether. Or worse, you stopped seeing them too. You got so used to being the emotionally strong one. You forgot strength also means allowing yourself to need things. Care, support, reciprocity, rest. Because here is something difficult but important. Emotional maturity is not measured by how much pain you can carry. Read that again. Because many deep feelers accidentally turn suffering into proof of love. If I can understand them enough, if I can just hold on longer, if I can be patient enough, maybe things will finally feel mutual. But relationships were never meant to survive through one person's emotional overfunctioning. Healthy connection requires movement in both directions, care in both directions, effort in both directions. And if one person is always understanding, while the other person keeps receiving understanding without growing, eventually the relationship starts feeding on your emotional energy, not intentionally, but still painfully. This is often where quiet burnout reaches its breaking point. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a slow internal realization. I cannot keep loving people at the cost of myself. And strangely, that realization often comes with guilt. Because deep feelers are not used to choosing themselves. You might even feel selfish for needing boundaries, selfish for stepping back, selfish for saying, I cannot be everything for everyone anymore. But maybe boundaries are not selfish. Maybe boundaries are what happens when compassion finally includes you too. Because for years, your empathy probably had no limits. Everyone got understanding. Everyone got grace. Everyone got patience. Even people who barely offered the same in return. But what if healing looks like something different? What if healing sounds like, I can understand your pain without carrying responsibility for it? I can care about you without abandoning myself. I can love deeply without losing myself trying to save someone else. And maybe that is the hardest lesson of all for people like you. Learning that love was never supposed to feel like emotional exhaustion. Learning that being understanding does not mean tolerating everything. Learning that kindness, without boundaries, becomes self-erasure. Because eventually, the person who always understands others has to decide something terrifying. What would happen if I finally started understanding myself too? And maybe that is where everything begins changing. Not when you stop caring, not when you harden, not when you suddenly become someone cold or emotionally distant, But the moment you finally ask yourself a question you may have avoided for years, what do I need? Not what everyone else needs. Not what keeps the relationship functioning. Not what prevents conflict. Not what keeps people comfortable. What do you need? Because if you have spent years being the one who understands everyone else, that question can feel strangely unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. You might not even know how to answer it at first, because somewhere along the way, you learn to monitor everyone else before yourself. You learn how to read rooms, read moods, read silence, read emotional shifts. You became fluent in everyone else's feelings, while slowly forgetting your own. And maybe that happened for good reasons. Maybe understanding people kept relationships stable. Maybe it kept conflict smaller. Maybe it helped you survive environments where emotional unpredictability felt unsafe. But survival patterns do not always become healthy relationship patterns. Sometimes they simply become familiar. And familiar does not always mean healthy. Because here is something difficult to hear. The reason deep feelers stay too long in painful relationships is rarely because they love too much. It is because they hope too much. They hope understanding will eventually become reciprocity. They hope patience will eventually become effort. They hope compassion will eventually teach someone how to care better. And sometimes, yes, people do grow. People do heal. People do change. But here is the part that matters. You cannot emotionally carry someone into becoming who they refuse to become themselves. And that truth hurts, especially for people like you. Because your instinct is to see possibility, potential, the wounded part underneath someone's behavior. But healing begins when you stop asking, who could they become? And gently begin asking, who are they showing me they are right now? That question changes everything. Because suddenly, you stop building relationships around hope alone. You start noticing patterns, consistency, effort, emotional availability. You stop mistaking emotional chemistry for emotional safety. You stop confusing being needed with being loved. And slowly, very slowly, something begins returning to you. Your energy, your peace, your voice, your ability to stop over-explaining people who keep hurting you. Your permission to say, I understand your pain, but I will not disappear inside it anymore. Maybe pause here for a second, because if this conversation feels deeply personal, I want you to hear this clearly. Being the understanding one is not weakness. Your empathy is not weakness. Your softness is not weakness. Your depth is not weakness. The problem was never your ability to care. The problem was learning to care for everyone while forgetting yourself. And healing does not mean becoming less loving. It means becoming more discerning, more reciprocal, more honest. It means learning that the healthiest relationships are not the ones where one person carries everything. They are the ones where both people put the weight down together. Because real love, healthy love, does not constantly exhaust you. It does not require you to overfunction emotionally just to feel secure. It does not make you beg for emotional presence. It does not survive only because of your patience. Healthy love feels different, steadier, safer, mutual. It feels like being understood, without having to translate your pain into something easier for someone else to digest. And maybe that is what you deserve. Not another relationship where you become the emotional home for someone who never learns how to come home to you, but a relationship where care moves in both directions, where softness is protected, where your emotional world matters too. Because the truth is, you were never meant to carry everyone. You were never meant to earn love through emotional labor. And you were never meant to disappear inside relationships just because you know how to understand pain. So if nobody has told you this lately, Let this be the reminder. You are allowed to stop overcarrying. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to want reciprocity. You are allowed to choose relationships that nourish you too. And maybe the deepest healing of all is realizing this. The person who understands everyone else finally deserves to be understood too. If this resonated with you, tell me honestly in the comments. Have you ever been the one who always understands everyone else while quietly feeling unseen yourself? And if something in this video gave language to what you've been carrying, stay here, because on this channel, we talk about the psychology beneath the pain, the patterns keeping you stuck, and the quiet ways people begin finding themselves again. So subscribe, and together, let's keep building something softer, wiser, and emotionally honest.